different sexual orientations,
Right.
less likely to use drugs and drink heavily. I'm assuming that we could make some comments about that they might be more empathetic. Certainly, they're what you're describing are people whose antenna for other people's pain and feelings is so. Why can't we just say that we have traded one set of trade-offs? We have exchanged one set of trade-offs for another.
Yeah, I'd like to take that.
Sure.
So, first of all, most kids in this generation are actually doing fine. Most are not suffering from depression, anxiety. Most come to college, they want to learn. The problem is that with this new morality, a subset have been empowered to call others out. This is the heart of the reason why we all should be alarmed, very alarmed. So think about it like this. Suppose you married someone who, no matter what you said, he or she just always took it in the worst possible way. They were always looking to prove that you're bad, you're wrong, and it was just constant. That would be really hard to be married to such a person. And now imagine that you admit students to your school and 5% of them are like this. And you're a professor and you always trusted your students, but no matter what you say, 5% of them are looking for some way to report you to the dean. It changes your teaching. You don't trust them. And when the fundamental character changes and basically can't really function. And then imagine that these students that began graduating in May of 2017, imagine that you run a small company, you have a tight-knit team, and you hire one of them. And this person is always looking to call someone out. So there's even a review of our book. Thank you for writing this book. Now I understand why all our bright new young hires go running to HR as soon as they overhear a joke in the hallway. I've heard from so many business people now just in the last year. It's like it's an unending soap opera. We're all so exhausted because somebody said something, somebody got angry, and this is taking up all our time. So when this call-out culture, which was nurtured in the university, in certain universities, especially in the Northeast and the West Coast, this call-out culture, industries that hire from those so journalism, media, and tech, talk to people in those fields about their young employees, and they'll say they're making life a nightmare. There's no trust anymore. Everybody's walking on eggshells. Yeah. That makes it very difficult to be creative. It makes it difficult to be cooperative.
No. I will say, John, I am broadly in sympathy with you, but the notion that everyone's life is a nightmare in tech.
Not everyone.
Yes.
But no, well.
Yeah. My experience, limited as it may be, with Silicon Valley is they're doing just fine. And if they have problem with people running to HR because it's usually because their bonus is, 6 figures as opposed to 7.
Mm-hmm. A year ago that was true. Talk to people now. This is very new.
Yeah, and when it comes to tolerance for things like sexual diversity and sexual expression, that definitely polls well. But at the same time, say tolerance, because when you look at sort of the speech policing that comes from the most activist members of the community, it's just so easy to get in trouble for even what might be a faux pas in any other time in history. And so one of the interesting things is also in the data that shows kind of the polarization of our society is sometimes you can surprise people by saying, and actually did you know that in iGen, people born after Gen Z, people born after 1995, that they're actually more conservatives. And people are kind of surprised when you say that. And it's like, and they're more liberals. Just there's a lot fewer moderates. So some of the polarization of our overall society is actually reflected in our students. And what I get worried about is sometimes the way the arguments actually happen on campus, and the way of actually trying to show that you're tolerant, open-minded. It becomes what I call a perfect rhetorical fortress, where essentially it's just ad hominem questions without ever getting to the substance of the actual argument. Now again, it could be a minority of students, but it can prevent you from getting to the rich the dynamic of the discussions you can have.
Would you feel differently if you were a gay person of color who grew up in the South in the 1950s and was looking at the world from that perspective?
What's actually kind of funny about that is I got approached by the and I'm a big comic book nerd, and somehow they sensed that about me. And I've been talking to someone who very much follows that description, and he's a gay man, he's Latino in his 40s, And suddenly he's finding that he's being reported to the bias response team because he's not saying everything exactly right. So I think it depends on which one you talk to, but I am hearing this from a lot of people who are, by every sort of privileged dimension, not someone you would consider sort of like the oppressor, coming to us saying, listen, like I'm suddenly the oppressor. I'm suddenly like the bad one because I don't say things exactly by this very regimented way that you're now supposed to at my comic book art school. So I actually think that from a number of them, you could actually, I mean, this was interesting for a friend of mine who went to Vanderbilt. She's a gay woman, and she had friends, obviously on campus, but she also was friends with a big part of the gay and trans population of Nashville. And she was, and this is a former intern of FIRE, and she told quite explicitly by the LGBT group at the kids from the townies, the gay and lesbian kids from town, partially because they were constantly offended by the way these other kids talk. So there is something there's an elitist aspect to it that is actually quite exclusionary, that actually ends up being used against, in some cases, people you would assume would be the people it was designed to protect.
But I think we can go even further with this. I think we can acknowledge the idea behind your question, which is we're privileged middle-aged white men analyzing a generation that is, sorry, in the book, in the book where we talk a lot about Lenore Skenazy.
That's right.
We're privileged.
Great book. It's a great book.
So, and of course, a lot of the activism on campus, originally it was especially about racial issues and then LGBT and gender issues, and now it's about everything, it seems. But I certainly agree with your point that people would look at this from different perspectives. But the book is organized around 3 psychological principles, 3 great truths that are as true for black as they are for white, gay, straight, I mean, they're true for all human beings. So the 3 great untruths that we think kids are being taught are, what doesn't kill you makes you weaker, always trust your feelings, and look at life as a battle between good people and evil people. And if you're a human being, those are probably the 3 worst ideas we could possibly put in your head if we want you to flourish. And so, thank you. And so, one of the best lines in the book, one of the best things that gets retweeted and quoted a lot, is a quote we have from Van Jones. So, Democratic activist, speaks at the University of Chicago, where they had an issue. They had somebody from the Trump campaign speak, and some students protested. And so David Axelrod asks Van Jones, what do you think about this, no platforming, safe space stuff? And Van Jones, he's clearly been thinking about this, and he's got, it's amazing what he says. He basically, more or less, he says, I don't want you to be safe ideologically. I don't want you to be safe emotionally. I want you to be strong. That's different. I'm not going to pave the jungle for you. Put on some boots and learn how to deal with adversity. So he's saying, if you're gay, if you're black, whatever you are, you need to be strong in this world. And going down this road of, you're so delicate, you're such a victim, we're going to protect you, that's the worst thing you can do to those people.
But what if it's I'm sorry to keep coming back to this. I mean, these are all comments made in the spirit of affection for this argument.
Okay. We like critics. Critics.
This is just a little nub of it that troubles is too strong a word, that I can't get around.
It triggers you.
It triggers me. Let's go back to the example I gave her. I'm a young black man living in southern Georgia in 1950. Mm-hmm. What does my life look like? Well, my life is full of lots and lots and lots of both small slights and significant structural impediments. Both matter. Mm-hmm. I am demeaned, or it's even worse if I'm a woman, I am demeaned on a daily basis through language, through attitudes, through reinforcement of my inferior status, and through, more than that, through a general feeling by the white majority that I should be okay because I should just be able to buck it up and try hard, and I can make it in America if I stop whining about racial prejudice, right? That was the line that was fed to black Americans for how many hundreds of years in this country. There's a there is an awful moment I was reading this. No, I was listening to a podcast, not my own, and there was a quote from someone in the. It was the what podcast is, doesn't matter, but it was a quote from a white guy in South in the 1960s, who was saying, we've had 3 years of this civil rights nonsense. All right, enough already. Let's just shut up about black people. Let's get on with our lives. That is a kind of manifestation of this idea that if we just tough it out and stop whining, everyone's going to be fine. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that this notion that that small slights don't matter does not have a distinguished history. It was part and parcel of a way in which women, minorities, all kinds of people were for many years kept down, right? So what we're seeing now is evidence of an overcorrection on the other side. Why is that a bad thing?
Well, if you're talking about places where the laws say you don't have equal rights and the norms say you're garbage and you've got to move out of our way, that's a terrible situation. And there are times and places when you have to have aggressive and well-organized protest to try to knock things down. Yale University in 2015, Middlebury College in 2017. We're talking about places that are trying as hard as they can. The ethos, the culture is explicitly anti-racist, progressive, welcoming, inclusive. So the strategies that were completely legitimate at a time when there were actually legal barriers, it's a completely different world from the one that we're talking about here on campus.
Yeah, and one of the things, a study that came out that actually so played into my own experience, I was immediately suspicious of it, was the Hidden Tribes study, which came out in the past just a couple months ago. And basically my experience with a lot of the more aggressive kind of speech policing was it wasn't a poor black person from Georgia. It was generally a wealthy white person who's going to a very elite college. And that had been most of my experience of campus censors. They were elite. They were people who came from wealthy backgrounds. And one of the things that was in the Hidden Tribes study was it was talking about the people who are the most passionate about this really aggressive form of speech policing is about 8% of the population. It's the highest economic class of any of the groups, and it has the least amount of actual racial diversity of every group except for the farthest to the right 8% group. So in a lot of times, and I've watched this happen over and over again, where people are saying, but what about this completely other situation, some other place, and that's why I should be policing microaggressions. But it takes the form of this very kind of almost Victorian kind of at Stanford, that essentially I'm going to police speech in the name of these people that actually I don't really know very well, but I know that this is a great evil, so I can make up for it somehow by being extra strict about what you're allowed to say. So in a lot of cases, what I see in this is a lot of classism, but the classism is partially coming from the speech policers.
Good. I want that concussion.
I'm going to say I'll make one last point, and then I will respectfully retreat back to my. But here's another thing that I can't get around. You're simultaneously making two claims, right? One is a claim that we are on and I'm exaggerating only slightly, we are on the brink of a highly significant social catastrophe. And then simultaneously, both you and Greg, not you, talk about how it's a minority. In your case, it's 5% who are ruining it for everyone, and then we just had the 8% from you. If in fact this movement is undermining the culture of high-tech firms in Silicon Valley, how could 5%? 5% is a very small number. When were the noisiest 5% of any generation ever fun to hang out with? By the way, and a lot of your complaints are rooted in the behavior of students at relatively elite universities. when did students at universities ever, it's just the dysfunction took different forms. In my school, it was a complete absence of connection to any meaningful social issues whatsoever. I could have used a lot of what's going on at Stanford now. I almost would have thought it was a more morally engaged experience as opposed to people just prepping for finance jobs. So I don't know. I mean, I'm struggling with why I should have anything more than a kind of academic interest in this trend.
Because the dynamics of a group, the dynamics of a culture, is not a majority vote. One of the big findings of the Hidden Tribes study, the study was put out by a group in the UK, but it's a huge study in America, is that majorities of every single group, male, female, old, young, black, white, majorities of every group dislike political correctness, except for that group that is called the progressive activist group on the far left. Yeah. So almost the great majority of people dislike political correctness, but we don't take a vote and say, you know what, most of us don't like it, therefore it's not going to affect us. It's not like that. Rather, we are all responding especially to threats. So it's one thing if 5% are kind of annoying, and you know what, they might say something annoying to you. You can put up with that. But what if instead we arm everybody with a little blowgun, and they can shoot darts into you, and it really hurts. Like it really goes into your skin, and an inch in, it really hurts. And so 5% of them are just going around blowing them at like anybody who looks askance at them. I think I'd change my behavior. I think we all have. That's basically what happened on campus. Most of our students are great, but the fact that there is a poster in every bathroom at NYU telling students how to report me if I say anything they don't like. I change my behavior. I don't say anything they might not like.
And I have 2 points about that. One is just that it's also, that lines up with the Hidden Tribes study, is that these tends to be people from fancy schools, and in my opinion, we actually privilege people from fancy schools probably a little bit too much. Maybe this will actually be the time when some people start realizing, wow, I'm actually having a lot of trouble with the people I'm hiring from Yale and Stanford. Maybe I should be hiring more from University of Indiana.
Hello?
Which actually,
how hard is this?
Which absolutely,
they're all a problem. Stop hiring.
Which I actually think would potentially be a great outcome. So they are disproportionately influential people, and I'm not sure. And I think we give too much praise to people from fancy schools. The other thing that we just really have to get back to, though, is the mental health aspect of it. Nobody benefits from the kind of numbers we're seeing in terms of anxiety, depression, particularly when it's avoidable, particularly when you have a situation in which people are more or less creating an environment that are causing people to believe that they are mentally fragile when they're actually anti-fragile. To talk themselves into depression and anxiety, that's the thing that scares me the most personally, that there's no upside to a huge increase in anxiety and depression in society. So that's one of the reasons why I think everybody should take this seriously.
And it's not the kids talking themselves into it per se. It's if you've been growing up and you've only been in the back of the SUV and you've been taken every place, and there's always an adult organizing your life and mediating all your disputes and telling you what to